The scorching sun beat down upon the barren, war-torn landscape, casting a golden glow over the desolate terrain. The temperature, a sweltering 32 degrees Celsius, seemed to shimmer and dance in the air, as if the very heat itself was alive and radiating an otherworldly energy. The smell of smoke and sweat hung heavy, a pungent and acrid odor that clung to every surface, every breath and every fiber of the soldiers' uniforms. The air was thick with the stench of cordite, a noxious and biting smell that seemed to sear the lungs and burn the eyes. In the distance, the sound of gunfire echoed through the stillness, a staccato beat that punctuated the silence like a deadly drumbeat. The report of the firearms, a mix of the sharp crack of the American-made M4A1 carbines and the deeper, more resonant boom of the Russian-made AK-47 assault rifles, seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The M4A1, with its distinctive triangular handguard and telescoping stock, was a ubiquitous sight on the battlefield, its 5.56 by 45 mm NATO rounds firing in short, controlled bursts as the soldiers sought to pin down their enemy. The AK-47, with its curved magazine and wooden stock, was equally prevalent, its 7.62 by 39 mm rounds firing in longer, more sustained bursts as the insurgents sought to lay down a withering field of fire. As the soldiers moved through the ruined cityscape, their boots kicked up small clouds of dust and debris, the fine powder hanging in the air like a misty veil. Sound of their footsteps, a dull, crunching noise, seemed to echo off the shattered buildings, the empty windows and doorways like empty eyes staring back at them. The soldiers themselves were a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits, their uniforms a testament to their individual experiences and backgrounds. Some wore the standard-issue Army combat uniform, its digital camouflage pattern, a muted blend of greens and browns that seemed to blend seamlessly into the surrounding environment. Others wore the multicam pattern, its more subdued color palette a nod to the urban environment they found themselves in. To their left, a crumbling apartment building loomed, its walls cracked and broken, the windows shattered and empty. The soldiers moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the rooftop and the upper floors for any sign of enemy activity. Their squad leader, a grizzled sergeant with a thick beard and a scar above his left eyebrow, motioned for them to move forward, his hand signals crisp and precise as he directed them towards the building's entrance. The sergeant's rifle, an M4A1 fitted with a scope and a suppressor, was slung over his shoulder, its barrel glinting dully in the sunlight. As they approached the building, the smell of decay and rot grew thicker, a noxious miasma that seemed to cling to every surface. The soldiers' footsteps slowed, their eyes scanning the entrance for any sign of booby traps or hidden dangers. The doorway, a shattered and broken thin peg, hung crookedly on its hinges. The wooden frame splintered and cracked. The soldiers moved cautiously, their rifles at the ready, their fingers resting lightly on the triggers as they scanned the darkness within. To their right, a deserted street stretched out, the buildings lining its length, a mix of ruined apartments and shattered storefronts. The soldiers' eyes flicked towards the street, their gazes scanning the rooftops and the alleyways for any sign of enemy movement. The street itself was empty. The only sound the distant rumble of gunfire and the creaking of the wind through the broken buildings. A discarded trash can, its metal body dented and rusted, sat at the edge of the sidewalk, a scattering of garbage and debris surrounding it like a noxious aura. The soldiers' attention, however, was focused on the building before them, their eyes fixed on the dark and ominous entrance. The sergeant's voice, a low and gravelly growl, cut through the silence, his words crisp and precise as he directed his team towards the entrance. "All right, guys, let's move in. Stay sharp, stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." The soldiers nodded, their faces set and determined, their rifles at the ready as they prepared to breach the building and face whatever dangers lay within. As they moved forward, the sound of their footsteps seemed to grow louder, the crunching of the debris beneath their boots echoing off the buildings like a deathwatch beetle ticking away. The air seemed to thicken, the sense of anticipation and foreboding growing heavier, like a physical weight that pressed down upon their shoulders. The soldiers' hearts beat faster, their pulses racing with anticipation, as they steeled themselves for the unknown dangers that lay ahead. The world around them seemed to slow, the very fabric of time itself stretching and compressing, as they stepped forward into the unknown, their rifles at the ready, their eyes fixed on the darkness within. As the battle commenced, the Allied forces, comprising of British, American, and French troops, employed a multi-pronged approach to outmaneuver the enemy. The British contingent, led by General Montgomery, initiated the assault by launching a series of coordinated artillery strikes against the Axis positions. The bombardment, which lasted for several hours, aimed to weaken the enemy's defenses and create breaches in their lines. Meanwhile, the American forces, under the command of General Patton, began to execute a flanking maneuver, seeking to exploit the vulnerabilities in the Axis army's left wing. The American troops, divided into 3 divisions, advanced in a staggered formation, with the lead division, the 1st Infantry Division, pushing forward in a spearhead formation. The 1st Division's 16th Infantry Regiment, supported by a battalion of M4 Sherman tanks, led the charge, moving swiftly across the open terrain. As they approached the enemy lines, the regiment's 1st and 2nd Battalions, loyed in a wide arc, fanned out to the left and right, respectively, in an attempt to outflank the Axis defenses. The 3rd Battalion, meanwhile, held back, providing a reserve force that could be committed to the battle as needed. To the north, the British 7th Armored Division, also known as the Desert Rats, launched a simultaneous attack, aiming to cut off the Axis forces, lines of communication, and supply. The division's 22nd Armored Brigade, equipped with Cromwell tanks, advanced in a column formation, with the 1st Battalion, Royal Tank Regiment, leading the way. As they pushed forward, the brigade's infantry components, the 1st and 7th Battalions, Rifle Brigade, moved in tandem, clearing enemy strongpoints and securing key terrain features. The French forces, operating on the Allied right flank, launched a bold assault against the Axis positions, seeking to break through the enemy lines and create a rupture in their defenses. The French 2nd Armored Division, led by General Leclerc, advanced in a dense formation, with the division's 12th Chasseurs d'Afrique Regiment, supported by a battalion of M5 Stuart tanks, spearheading the attack. The regiment's 1st and 2nd squadrons, deployed in a narrow frontage, pushed forward, seeking to exploit the weaknesses in the Axis defenses, while the 3rd Squadron, held in reserve, stood ready to reinforce the attack as needed. As the battle raged on, the Axis forces, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought tenaciously, attempting to hold back the Allied tide. The German 21st Panzer Division, positioned on the Axis left flank, launched a series of counterattacks against the American forces, seeking to blunt their momentum. The division's 104th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, supported by a battalion of Panzer IV tanks, struck at the American 1st Division's exposed flank, hoping to create a breach in the Allied lines. However, the Americans, anticipating this move, had positioned a reserve force, comprising the 18th Infantry Regiment, to counter the German counterattack. The 18th Infantry Regiment, supported by a battalion of M10 tank destroyers, moved swiftly to intercept the German counterattack, engaging the enemy in a fierce and intense battle. The American troops, deploying in a defensive posture, utilized their superior firepower and maneuverability to devastating effect, inflicting heavy casualties on the German forces. As the German counterattack faltered, the American troops seized the initiative, pushing forward to exploit the weaknesses in the Axis defenses. To the south, the British 50th Infantry Division, operating in conjunction with the 7th Armored Division, launched a pincer movement against the Axis forces, seeking to encircle and isolate them. The division's 151st Brigade, supported by a battalion of Churchill tanks, advanced in a wide arc, aiming to cut off the Axis lines of communication and supply. As the brigade's infantry components, the 6th and 9th Battalions, Durham Light Infantry, moved forward, they encountered stiff resistance from the Axis forces, who fought determinedly to hold their ground. The battle, now raging across multiple fronts, witnessed a complex series of maneuvers, as each side sought to outmaneuver and outflank the other. The Allied forces, through their superior firepower, maneuverability, and coordination, gradually gained the upper hand, pushing the Axis forces back and creating breaches in their defenses. However, the Axis troops, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, continued to fight fiercely, inflicting significant casualties on the Allied forces and slowing their advance. As the day wore on, the Allies, having secured key terrain features and weakened the Axis defenses, prepared to deliver the decisive blow. The American forces, having successfully repelled the German counterattack, paused to regroup and reorganize, prior to resuming their advance. The British forces, having encircled the Axis positions, stood poised to launch a crushing assault, aimed at shattering the enemy's morale and will to resist. The French forces, having broken through the Axis lines, pushed forward, seeking to exploit the weaknesses in the enemy's defenses and create a rupture in their positions. The stage was now set for the final act of the battle, as the Allied forces, having secured the initiative, prepared to unleash a devastating assault against the Axis positions. The outcome of the battle, though still uncertain, seemed increasingly likely to favor the Allies, who had gained a significant advantage in terms of terrain, manpower, and firepower. As the sun began to set on the battlefield, the Axis forces, battered and bruised, steeled themselves for the impending onslaught, knowing that their survival depended on their ability to withstand the Allied onslaught and hold their ground against overwhelming odds. As the battalion advanced through the dense jungle, the sounds of artillery fire and small arms echoed through the air, creating a cacophony of chaos that made it difficult for the soldiers to communicate with each other. The M4A1 carbines, chambered in 5.56 by 45 mm NATO, fired in short, controlled bursts, their muzzle velocities reaching up to 2,970 feet per second. The soldiers' training kicked in, and they began to lay down a withering field of fire, attempting to pin down the enemy and prevent them from escaping. The logistics of the operation were complex, with multiple units working together to achieve a common goal. The 60 mm M224 mortars, with their maximum range of 500 meters, provided indirect fire support, raining down high explosive shells on the enemy's positions. The mortarmen worked tirelessly, loading and firing the mortars with precision, their calculations taking into account the angle of elevation, azimuth, and range to the targets. Meanwhile, the forward observers, equipped with the ANPEQ-1 Special Operations Forces Laser Acquisition Marker, SOFLAM, worked to identify and mark enemy targets for the artillery. The SOFLAM's laser designator, operating at a wavelength of 1064 nanometers, allowed the observers to paint the targets, providing the artillery with precise coordinates for their fire missions. The observers' calculations were meticulous, taking into account the target's range, elevation, and azimuth, as well as the artillery's firing data, to ensure that the shells hit their mark. As the battle raged on, the soldiers began to experience the effects of fatigue, their bodies drained from the intense physical exertion and the mental strain of being in a life-or-death situation. The heat and humidity of the jungle environment only added to their misery, as they struggled to maintain their pace and keep up with the advancing units. The soldiers' canteens were almost empty, and the lack of water and food began to take its toll, their mouths dry and their stomachs growling with hunger. Despite these challenges, the soldiers pressed on, driven by their training and their determination to complete their mission. They moved stealthily, using the cover of the jungle to conceal themselves from the enemy, their senses on high alert as they scanned their surroundings for any sign of danger. The sounds of the jungle, from the chirping of birds to the rustling of leaves, were amplified in their ears as they waited for the slightest indication of enemy movement. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire erupted from a nearby thicket, and the soldiers hit the ground, seeking cover behind the nearest trees or rocks. The enemy fire was intense, with rounds whizzing past their heads and ricocheting off the surrounding foliage. The soldiers returned fire, their rifles and machine guns blazing as they attempted to suppress the enemy and gain the upper hand. The chaos of the battle was intense, with bullets flying everywhere and the sounds of gunfire and explosions filling the air. The soldiers' hearts were racing, their adrenaline pumping as they fought for their lives. The smell of gunpowder and sweat hung heavy in the air, as the soldiers struggled to maintain their composure and stay focused on their mission. In the midst of the chaos, the soldiers' training kicked in, and they began to work together seamlessly, their movements choreographed by months of practice and drills. They laid down a withering field of fire, using their rifles and machine guns to pin down the enemy and prevent them from escaping. The soldiers' communications were concise and effective, as they worked together to outmaneuver the enemy and gain the upper hand. As the battle raged on, the soldiers began to gain ground, slowly but surely pushing the enemy back. The enemy's fire began to slacken, and the soldiers took advantage of the lull to regroup and reorganize. They moved forward cautiously, their senses on high alert as they scanned their surroundings for any sign of danger. The jungle was quiet once again, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The soldiers' mission was far from over, as they continued to push deep into enemy territory. They moved stealthily, using the cover of the jungle to conceal themselves from the enemy, their senses on high alert as they waited for the slightest indication of danger. The soldiers' training and experience had prepared them for this moment, and they were determined to see their mission through to the end, no matter the cost. The artillery fire continued to rain down on the enemy's positions, as the soldiers worked to outmaneuver and outflank them. The mortars and artillery pieces fired in a steady rhythm, their shells exploding with deadly precision on the enemy's strongpoints. The enemy's defenses began to crumble as the soldiers' relentless pressure took its toll. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the jungle, the soldiers finally reached their objective. They secured the area, their rifles and machine guns at the ready, as they waited for any sign of enemy movement. The jungle was quiet once again. The only sounds the distant call of a bird and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The soldiers' mission had been a success, but at great cost. The enemy had been defeated, but not without inflicting heavy casualties on the battalion. The soldiers' bodies were weary, their minds numb from the intense fighting and the loss of their comrades. They knew that they would have to do it all again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. But for now, they could rest, their mission accomplished, and their lives spared. The survivors would have to live with the memories of the battle, the sounds and smells of war etched forever in their minds. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of utter devastation, the jungle scarred and charred from the intense fighting. The soldiers' equipment was scattered everywhere, some of it damaged or destroyed in the battle. The enemy's bodies lay strewn about, a grim reminder of the cost of war. The soldiers moved quietly, their footsteps muted by the dense underbrush, as they worked to secure the area and tend to their wounded comrades. The medical evacuation teams arrived soon after, their helicopters thundering through the skies as they lifted off to carry the wounded to safety. The soldiers' injuries were severe, some of them life-threatening, and the medical teams worked tirelessly to stabilize them and prepare them for transport. The wounded soldiers were strapped to stretchers, their bodies racked with pain as they were carried to the waiting helicopters. As the last of the wounded were evacuated, the soldiers began to regroup and reorganize. They moved cautiously, their senses on high alert as they scanned their surroundings for any sign of danger. The jungle was quiet once again, the only sounds the distant call of a bird and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The soldiers' mission was far from over as they continued to push deep into enemy territory, determined to complete their objective and bring the war to an end. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, as the soldiers continued to fight their way through the jungle. The enemy was relentless, and the soldiers had to be constantly on guard against attack. They moved stealthily, using the cover of the jungle to conceal themselves from the enemy, their senses on high alert as they waited for the slightest indication of danger. The soldiers' training and experience had prepared them for this moment, and they were determined to see their mission through to the end, no matter the cost. The battle was far from over, as the soldiers continued to push deep into enemy territory. They moved cautiously, their rifles and machine guns at the ready, as they waited for any sign of enemy movement. The jungle was a maze of twisting vines and dense underbrush, and the soldiers had to be constantly on guard against ambush. The enemy was everywhere, and the soldiers had to be prepared to fight at a moment's notice. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the jungle, the soldiers finally reached the edge of a small clearing. They moved cautiously, their senses on high alert as they scanned their surroundings for any sign of danger. The clearing was quiet, the only sounds the distant call of a bird and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The soldiers' mission was far from over, as they continued to push deep into enemy territory, determined to complete their objective and bring the war to an end. As the cacophony of war reached a fever pitch, the battlefield transformed into a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. The earth trembled beneath the feet of the soldiers as the relentless bombardment of artillery fire ripped through the air, leaving behind a trail of smoldering ruins and shattered dreams. The stench of smoke and sweat hung heavy over the landscape, a noxious cloud that clung to every surface like a bad omen. In the midst of this bedlam, a sense of primal fury gripped the hearts of the combatants, driving them forward with a ferocity that bordered on madness. The clash of steel on steel echoed through the din, a deadly symphony that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Every second was a lifetime, a fleeting moment of terror and triumph that hung precariously in the balance. To the north, a battalion of infantrymen charged forward with bayonets fixed, their faces set in grim determination as they hurled themselves against the enemy lines. The air was filled with the screams of the wounded and the dying, a chilling cacophony that seemed to shred the very fabric of sanity. Every step forward was a gamble with death, every breath a whispered prayer for survival. As the troops advanced, they were met with a hail of gunfire that seemed to come from all directions at once. The bullets whizzed through the air with a deadly whine, striking their targets with a sickening crunch that sent men tumbling to the ground. The earth was slick with blood and mud, a treacherous terrain that threatened to send even the surest foot tumbling. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the soldiers pressed on, driven by a fierce loyalty to their comrades and their cause. They fought with every ounce of strength they possessed, their movements a blur of desperate energy as they struggled to gain a foothold on the contested ground. Every inch of terrain was a hard-won victory, every moment a testament to the unyielding spirit of the warriors who refused to yield. To the south, a squadron of cavalrymen thundered across the plain, their horses' hooves pounding out a rhythmic drumbeat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The riders were a whirlwind of steel and silk, their sabers flashing in the sunlight as they cut a swath through the enemy ranks. The air was filled with the scent of horseflesh and sweat, a pungent aroma that seemed to capture the raw essence of war. As the horsemen charged, they were met with a wall of gunfire that seemed to erupt from the very ground itself. The bullets ripped through the air with a deadly precision, striking the horses with a terrifying frequency that sent them crashing to the ground. The riders were thrown from their saddles, their bodies set tumbling through the air with a bone-jarring impact that seemed to shatter every bone in their bodies. And yet, even as the cavalrymen struggled to regain their footing, they refused to yield. They fought on with a ferocity that bordered on madness, their movements a frenzied blur of steel and fury as they clashed with the enemy in a deadly dance of destruction. Every moment was a fight for survival, every breath a desperate gasp for air, as the warriors struggled to stay alive in a world gone mad. In the midst of this chaos, a lone figure emerged, a towering giant of a man who seemed to embody the very spirit of war itself. He was a colossus of muscle and fury, his face a twisted mask of rage and determination, as he charged forward with a battle cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. His sword was a blur of steel and death, a deadly scythe that cut through the enemy ranks with a precision that seemed almost surgical. As he fought, the warrior seemed to become one with the battlefield itself, his movements a fluid extension of the chaos that surrounded him. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of steel and fury that seemed to leave destruction in his wake. Every step forward was a victory, every blow a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. And yet, even as the warrior fought on with a ferocity that seemed to border on madness, he was not invincible. A bullet ripped through the air, striking him with a sickening crunch that sent him tumbling to the ground. The warrior's body crashed to the earth with a bone-jarring impact, his sword slipping from his grasp as he struggled to rise. For a moment the battlefield seemed to revitalize, the combatants pausing in reverence as they gazed upon the fallen giant. The air was heavy with anticipation, a sense of expectation that seemed to hang precariously in the balance. And then, in an instant, the moment was shattered, the battlefield erupting into a frenzy of chaos and destruction as the warriors clashed with a ferocity that seemed to have no end. The fight raged on, a never-ending cycle of violence and fury that seemed to consume everything in its path. The earth was scorched and blackened, the air thick with the stench of smoke and sweat. Every moment was a struggle for survival, every breath a desperate gasp for air, as the warriors fought on with a ferocity that seemed to have no bounds. In this maelstrom of chaos there was no quarter asked and none given. The combatants fought with every ounce of strength they possessed, their movements a blur of desperate energy as they clashed with a ferocity that seemed to border on madness. Every second was a lifetime, a fleeting moment of terror and triumph that hung precariously in the balance. And yet, even as the battle raged on with no end in sight, there was a sense of inevitability that seemed to hang in the air. The outcome was far from certain, the fate of the warriors hanging precariously in the balance. But one thing was clear. Only one side could emerge victorious. Only one banner could be left standing amidst the ruins of the battlefield. The question was, which one would it be? The answer, much like the battle itself, remained shrouded in uncertainty, a mystery that only time would reveal. For now, the warriors could only fight on, their movements a frenzied blur of steel and fury as they clashed with a ferocity that seemed to have no end. The battle was far from over, the outcome still hanging precariously in the balance. But one thing was certain. Only the strongest would survive. Only the most determined would emerge victorious from the chaos and destruction that surrounded them. The once pristine landscape was now a desolate expanse of twisted metal and charred remains, a haunting testament to the unforgiving nature of war. The air reeked of smoke and burnt flesh, a noxious odor that clung to every surface like a malignant entity. The sounds of gunfire and explosions had finally subsided, replaced by an eerie silence, punctuated only by the faint moans of the wounded and the dying. As the survivors stumbled through the wreckage, they were met with a gruesome tableau of devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls cracked and broken, their windows shattered into 1,000 razor-sharp shards. The streets were strewn with the debris of war, shattered tanks, crushed cars, and the splintered remnants of trees. The very earth itself seemed to have been torn asunder, as if the war had unleashed a fury that had shaken the foundations of the planet. The casualty reports began to filter in, each one a heartbreaking tale of loss and sacrifice. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of soldiers lay dead or dying, their bodies broken and battered beyond recognition. The medical teams worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, but their efforts were often in vain. The injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive. Many of those who had survived the initial onslaught would not survive the night. Among the survivors was a young soldier named Jack, who had been caught in the crossfire during the initial assault. He had been hit in the leg, a bullet shattering his femur and leaving him crippled and helpless. As he lay on the ground, he watched in horror as his comrades fell around him, their screams echoing through the air. He remembered the face of his best friend, Alex, who had been killed just a few feet away. The memory of Alex's death would haunt Jack for the rest of his life, a painful reminder of the brutality and senselessness of war. Another survivor, a young woman named Sarah, had been part of a medical team that had been caught in the midst of the battle. She had seen unspeakable things: the mangled bodies, the severed limbs, the faces frozen in perpetual screams. She had worked tirelessly to save as many as she could, but it had been a losing battle. As she stumbled through the wreckage, she came across a small child, no more than 5 years old, who had been separated from its parents. The child's eyes were wide with fear, its tiny body shaking with sobs. Sarah scooped up the child, holding it close as she tried to comfort it. She knew that she had to find the child's parents, but as she looked around, she realized that they might never be found. As the night wore on, the survivors began to regroup, forming small clusters of battered and bruised soldiers. They shared what little food and water they had, huddled together for comfort and support. They knew that they had to keep moving, to find a way out of the devastated landscape and back to safety. But for now, they just sat, stunned and silent, trying to process the unimaginable horrors they had witnessed. The officers, too, were in shock, their faces pale and drawn. They had never seen anything like this before, and they struggled to come to terms with the sheer scale of the disaster. They knew that they had to take charge, to rally their troops and lead them to safety. But as they looked around, they saw only destruction and despair. The war had been lost, and all that remained was to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the survivors stumbled to their feet, their eyes bleary and tired. They knew that they had a long and difficult journey ahead of them, but they also knew that they had to keep moving. They had to find a way out of the ruins, to escape the devastation and find a way back to safety. And so, with heavy hearts and weary bodies, they set off into the unknown, leaving behind a landscape forever scarred by the horrors of war. The journey was slow and painful, the survivors struggling to navigate the treacherous terrain. They had to avoid the wreckage of buildings, the rubble-strewn streets, and the twisted remnants of cars and tanks. They had to be careful, too, for the enemy was still out there, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. The survivors moved in small groups, scouting ahead and covering each other's backs. They knew that they couldn't trust anyone, that the enemy could be hiding anywhere. As they walked, they came across more and more survivors, each with their own story of survival and loss. There was Maria, a young mother who had lost her child in the bombing. There was John, a soldier who had been trapped in a burning building and had barely escaped with his life. There was Emily, a nurse who had spent the night tending to the wounded and was now exhausted and traumatized. Each of them had a unique tale to tell, a story of courage and resilience in the face of unimaginable horrors. The survivors walked for hours, the sun beating down on them like a relentless drum. They were thirsty and hungry, their bodies crying out for rest and relief. But they knew that they couldn't stop. Not yet. They had to keep moving, to find a way out of the ruins and back to safety. And so they pressed on, their feet aching and their hearts heavy with grief. As the day wore on, the survivors began to see signs of hope. They saw buildings that were still standing, their walls cracked but intact. They saw trees that were still green, their leaves rustling in the breeze. They saw birds flying overhead, their songs a sweet and melancholy sound. The survivors knew that they were not alone, that there were still things in this broken world that were beautiful and pure. And yet, even as they saw these signs of hope, the survivors couldn't shake off the feeling of despair. They knew that they had lost something precious, something that could never be regained. They had lost their innocence, their sense of security and trust. They had seen the worst of humanity, the darkest depths of the human heart, and they knew that they would never be the same again, that they would always carry the scars of this terrible war with them. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the devastated landscape, the survivors came across a small village. It was a tiny place, a cluster of houses and shops that seemed to have been spared the worst of the destruction. The survivors stumbled towards it, their hearts filled with hope and their bodies exhausted. They knew that they still had a long way to go. But for now, they had found a place to rest and recover, and as they settled in for the night, their eyes closed and their bodies relaxed. They knew that they would face whatever came next, together and as one. As we conclude our comprehensive examination of the tumultuous events that have shaped the modern world, it is essential to delve into the long-term geopolitical implications that have arisen from these conflicts. The aftermath of these events has led to a profound rearrangement of the global landscape, with lasting effects on international relations, global governance, and the emergence of new world powers. The most significant consequence of these events has been the rise of the United States as a dominant world power. The nation's emergence as a global leader has been marked by its unparalleled military might, economic prowess, and cultural influence. However, this ascendance has also led to increased tensions with other nations, particularly those that feel threatened by American hegemony. The complexities of these relationships have given rise to a delicate balancing act, as nations navigate the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and competing interests. In addition to the rise of the United States, the events of the past century have also witnessed the emergence of new global players. The rise of China, for instance, has been a significant development in recent years, with the nation making tremendous strides in economic growth, military modernization, and technological advancements. This surge has sparked both awe and trepidation, as the international community grapples with the implications of a resurgent China. Other nations, such as India, Brazil, and Russia, have also been making notable strides, further complicating the global landscape. The repercussions of these shifts have been far-reaching, with significant implications for global governance, international trade, and security. The establishment of new institutions, such as the United Nations, the European Union, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has reflected the evolving nature of global politics. These entities have played crucial roles in promoting cooperation, resolving conflicts, and addressing pressing issues such as climate change, poverty, and inequality. However, despite these advancements, the world remains beset by numerous challenges. The persistence of regional conflicts, terrorism, and nuclear proliferation continues to threaten global stability. The widening chasm between the rich and the poor, both within and between nations, has led to increased social unrest and migration. The strain on the environment, exacerbated by climate change, has raised fundamental questions about the sustainability of human civilizations. As we reflect on these developments, it is essential to recognize that the legacy of the past continues to shape our present and future. The lessons of history serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of cooperation, diplomacy, and collective action in addressing the complexities of the modern world. The experiences of nations, both successes and failures, offer valuable insights into the intricacies of statecraft, the importance of strategic alliances, and the need for adaptability in an ever-changing world. As a historian, I am reminded of the profound words of the ancient Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, who observed that, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." This poignant reflection underscores the dynamic nature of human history, where the past, present, and future are inextricably linked. It is a powerful reminder that our understanding of the world is constantly evolving, influenced by the experiences of previous generations, and shaped by the choices we make today. As we navigate the complexities of the modern world, it is essential to approach these challenges with a deep sense of humility, recognizing the limitations of our knowledge and the uncertainties of the future. It is only through a nuanced understanding of the past, a thoughtful analysis of the present, and a bold vision for the future that we can hope to create a more just, equitable, and peaceful world. And so, I invite you to join me on this journey through the complexities of military history, as we explore the triumphs and tragedies, the victories and defeats, and the enduring legacies that have shaped the world we live in today. Subscribe to our channel, and together, let us delve into the fascinating world of military history, and uncover the secrets that lie within. For in the words of the great historian, George Santayana, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The past, acknowledging the mistakes and successes of previous generations. By doing so, we can work towards creating a more just, equitable, and peaceful world, where the dignity and well-being of all individuals are respected and protected. As the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel once said, "The only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history." These words serve as a stark reminder of the cyclical nature of human conflict and the importance of learning from our mistakes. As we move forward, it is essential to recognize the value of historical knowledge, acknowledging the complexities and nuances of the past, while striving to create a better future for all. If you have enjoyed this journey through the complexities of historical conflicts, please subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis and thought-provoking discussions on the intricacies of human history. By exploring the past, we can gain a deeper understanding of the present and work towards creating a brighter, more peaceful future for generations to come. As the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." Let us embark on this journey of discovery, acknowledging the ever-changing nature of human experience and the importance of learning from our collective past. Subscribe now and join us on this fascinating exploration of the human condition.